Hello and welcome to another episode of the Opportunity Podcast. I'm your host, Greg Elfering, the head of marketing over here at Empire Flippers. And today I am speaking with Josh Springer. So, Josh is the head of corporate development over at Hawke Media, and I believe also underneath Hawke Capital, though I'm not quite sure on that, but definitely on Hawke Media. So, Hawke Media is a pretty cool marketing agency that I recently found out about. And I found out that one of the ways that Hawke Media as a marketing agency is growing is acquiring other agencies, which I love this. I think growth through acquisition is one of the most underrated ways to grow a company, like really, really fast if you know what you're doing. And in this interview, Josh and I start talking about like the deal structures, how he does these agency acquisitions, which are effectively a no money down kind of deal. Now, I think this is quite interesting. If you're a newbie buyer, you probably have heard of the gurus out there on YouTube or TikTok or whatever talking about how you can buy, a 7-figure, 8-figure business for no money down or $1, right? And the truth is, yes, you absolutely can do that. But it's not, probably not you. If you're brand new as a business buyer, you probably can't do that. And Josh and I get into a little bit as to the reason why and how Hawke can actually do it, where not only can they do it, but it actually makes a lot of sense and a lot of financial sense from the seller's point of view as well. So I think that's super interesting. Whole podcast is super interesting. So I will stop talking and we'll get into it. So with that said, let's bring Josh on and I'll see you on the other side. All right, I got Josh Springer here with me from Hawke itself. I read the book that Eric wrote for Hawke, and I reached out to Eric and started finding out about what you do, Josh. And I got super interested because obviously we have some relevant shared interests here. But for my audience out there that has never heard of the Josh Springer, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Appreciate the time this morning. Yeah, so I run the corporate development team here at Hawke Media, so really focused around the inorganic growth of the company. So think agency acquisitions, the occasional software investment or AI play. But really, what we're doing right now is evaluating different ways we continue to grow in the marketplace by bringing on other agencies and partners through an acquisitive sense to sort of under the Hawke umbrella or the Hawke family of companies.
Yeah, I love that you guys focus on acquiring agencies. I think agencies, I sold a little over 2,000 businesses at this point in my career. And I think agencies are always a bit of an unsung hero as an asset class. So I think it's cool you guys like focus on that. Before we get too deep into like the more meaty M&A stuff, tell me a little bit about how you came upon this role. Like, what was your background? Have you done deals yourself, or what's the come up story of Josh?
Yeah, definitely. My personal background is a little bit atypical of the traditional sort of M&A guy or financial professional, you'll say. So I actually majored in history at a California State University, and shortly after graduating, moved down to Los Angeles. I was then folding sweatshirts in an aloe yoga boutique on the Santa Monica Promenade, just kind of shaking hands and meeting people. And then this investment banker or M&A advisor kind of came over one day and we were chatting for a while, and he mentioned they had an associate role that he then took me under his wing with. I was with him for about 2 years down in Santa Monica. They're a buy side M&A advisory. Really what we focused on there was middle market private equity deal flow for the most part, and just kind of mitigating the transactions between the sellers and the buyers and some strategic targets. So did that for a few years. Strong shop, did quite a few deals over there, and then got linked up with Eric. He mentioned they were trying to build out a corp dev team and kind of really focus on their own acquisitive efforts internally without any sort of outside funding or capital. And kind of what they were doing lined up with what the experience and background that I had with what I was up to. And have now been with Hawke for just shy of 4 years. We've done 12 deals to date, have 200 LOIs that should be closed up here right now. And yeah, continue to grow out the team and it's really kind of scale it up.
That's awesome. I don't meet many people in the M&A world with that kind of like atypical background, as you said. So like you and I are similar in that regard. Like I came from the oil rigs, you came from the folding clothes.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
the true
definitely.
pedigree of an M&A professional right there.
Yeah, it's one of those things that's, I figured the classes I was taking weren't going to get me there, so I better start shaking some hands.
Hey man, that's the best way to get the most, intriguing opportunities. So I would definitely don't knock it. Well, cool, man. I guess that brings us to Hawk then. So you've been there for 4 years. So as the head of corporate development, how are you assessing like the right time for you guys to do like because I know Hawk is doing other ways of growing the agency with getting clients, paid media, inbound content.
Mhm.
But you guys are also using this acquisitions of the agencies to grow Hawk proper. So is there kind of like a balancing act of how you guys are pursuing, like how you divide up your time?
Yeah, it's definitely a balancing act. The organization as a whole, and I think even our founders, Eric and Tony, would attest to this as well, is that we kind of operate on the speed and just pay the tickets as opposed to kind of go forward slowly. So the idea here is that we're finding different ways to grow. We're probably going to tackle them as quickly or effectively as possible without really kind of focusing on pumping the brakes or mitigating it. The idea here is, and even Tony mentioned this to me the other day, he's like, why don't you create a problem that we have to solve? So the idea here is when we're looking at different acquisitions, it's as we kind of bring in new people, it's not just about sort of market share or acquiring books of business or revenue kind of retention or growth. It's more along the lines like what kind of smart, intelligent people can we bring to the table with good teams we think we can help grow faster than they've been able to. They can actually also assist in our growth going forward as well. So as much as like a lot of groups are just kind of rolling up 20, 30 agencies and packaging them to sell off, our goal here is like, no, if we bring on the right people that we can continue to scale internally within the organization, that kind of hedges the bet on the other side. The thesis around what we're looking for and where we're looking for, it does change as we do deals in different cities or as we're kind of tapping into new client bases or end market exposure and things like that. But for the most part, if we find a good team with the right people, then it's seldom we'll pass up the opportunity to bring them on board.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you one of your things when you acquire them, you're actively looking at the team to integrate their team with you. Like that's part of the value add is bringing that team on board.
Yeah, so we're fairly unique in the sense that we never really let go of anybody or cut anybody through an acquisition. Occasionally that will happen just because people already have like one foot out the door through just a transaction. This is an excuse to do so. But the thought process here is that when, especially in the agency world, as you're bringing people over, the kind of the meat and the value behind an agency is the people that it kind of comes with. So you start cutting people, you start losing clients, you start messing with culture. Then all of a sudden you're left with this shell that kind of doesn't really resemble what you're trying to buy in the first place. So the idea here is like, look, we can bring everybody over. We don't want to shake up the day to day too much. We can take most of the nuance of running the organization off of their plate, allow them to do what they do best and what they really want to do, while providing more opportunities for the employees. And then from there, sky's kind of the limit.
That makes sense. So I'm curious if you agree with this or not, but from my perspective, when I've sold businesses to my clients, right? Like getting the deal done is the fun part, but actually integrating the
Mhm.
deal as the buyer afterward is like the oh shit part. Like, what have I done? So when
Yeah.
you acquire these agencies, first of all, I know personally because I met Tyler, right? So I did an onboarding call with Tyler. I believe he was one of the agency owners you acquired, and he's still with you.
Yep.
So my question is kind of divided into two parts here. When you acquire an agency, how do you keep that team on board versus them getting scared and leaving and still like having that renewed energy at the new chapter, but also how do you keep the founders on board? Because that also seems to be part of your strategy here.
Yeah, definitely. So I think what it really comes down to is just genuine transparency. And I know everybody says that, but really just kind of being open and discussing with the founders up at first. Traditionally, just the founders to start things off because you have to kind of maintain an air of confidentiality around these things
Right.
because we really don't want people to get spooked because a lot of people just flat out. I think the biggest fear around M&A, specifically through a transaction, is just the notion of just the lack of understanding around it, sort of the ignorance around what a transaction means. People kind of hear all these stories about this big corporate overlord takeover, and it's not always like that. There can be good things that come out of it, but the idea here is we really just kind of when we're engaging with founders, we tell them kind of straight up what our plan is, what we're thinking. If a founder does want to exit at a period of time, that's completely okay. All we ask is sort of understanding the philosophy or the ambition around the why, the when, and kind of what the team would look like without. Most agencies we found, even on the smaller scale, do have sort of a second in command that can generally steer the ship if the or steer the ship, excuse me, if the founder were to leave. But the idea here is that we're setting up sort of a growth incentive and a growth plan that can get these founders to the next level given the engine that we currently provide. We've had founders come over, their intention was to leave within the first even 90 days, and now they're on a multi-year kind of growth plan with us, scaling out entire service lines. So a lot of time people just seeing the opportunity kind of in front of them is really helpful. A big part of the team aspect of it is making sure that the founder can convey that well to the team. And often, what we'll do, I'm actually doing one of these next week with an agency we have under LOI, is allowing some of us on the executive board to speak with their team and let them know, like, hey, everyone's jobs are okay. We're not messing with your salaries. You're still going to have benefits. It's going to be all right. You will have more opportunity in different areas if you want to expand into it. We've had some people as well just come over that might just be kind of in a traditionalized BD or sales role and like, hey, no, I'd like to tackle more into a different side of things, focusing on the servicing of the client or even on the internal marketing piece. So it really kind of does open a lot of outlets and doors for them. I think just conveying that message is really important and letting them know that it's not going to be a scalp operation or something like that.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, there's good reason for people to fear that with how private equity often comes about with these deals. Because I mean, they often have those investment mandates or 2 to 5 years or whatever. It could be a pretty short time frame before they need to try to sell it to
Yeah.
another private equity company, right? So that makes sense talking to people like that. When you do acquire these, and this goes back to integration, because I'm very curious on how you guys do all this. So let's say you acquire two agencies. Do they tend to be like different services? Like one's a HubSpot agency, the other one maybe it's, I don't know, Google AdWords agency, or would you acquire multiple of them? And how do you integrate those as departments within Hawk overall?
Yeah, so our thesis around it, and as I mentioned, we're not backed by any outside capital or private equity, so we're not kind of working on constraints of having to deploy X amount of dollars from a
Mhm.
fund at a certain timeline in a certain space or anything like that.
That's a
So it
beautiful
does
place
mean we
to
have to
be,
be
by the
picky.
way. Yeah.
It can be, yeah. It means we do have to be picky with it, but it also allows us to be flexible and kind of call shots as we see fit. So when we're looking at these, most agencies will fall into like a category of having complementary services to us and being basically a smaller version of us, which we can generally integrate fairly seamlessly, bring them over, give their team just kind of a direct integration within our organization, give them more opportunity, and then kind of try to grow them as much as we can. The founder, in that sense, usually falls into a BD role or will be exiting at some point. Another outlet that we've done quite a few of, probably about half our acquisitions, have been on the supplementary or sub-supplementary service offering line. That being a service that we might offer in-house or might offer it not at a level, or excuse me, we might not offer in-house or not offer at a level that we would like to. For instance, we acquired a web development shop up in Victoria a while back that we were outsourcing a ton of our work to, even though we offered it in-house. We're like, look, this is silly. Let's bring them on board. We know their team. We know how they operate. We know how they work. Let's just bring them in. They started running our web dev team. The most recent acquisition that we just closed up and announced, Simply Be, was a personal branding agency based out of Chicago and Nashville. That was not a service offering that we ever had internally. We kind of discussed it for a period of time, but it wasn't something that we were currently developing out. We're like, wow, this provides a lot of opportunity. However, to make this successful, we can't just organically hire around this to try to develop it. We need an expert in the space who has the reputation, who knows how to do it. And their team was kind of perfect for that. So we brought that over supplementary. And then that can go even as far as the acquisition we did up in Toronto called Morpheo, which is an AI data mitigation platform, in which case we were looking at developing out that ourselves internally, which is now called Hawke AI. We branded to them. They were basically developing the same thing we were. They were just 10 steps ahead of us and candidly better at it than we were. So like, let's bring it all in together. Let's make it work together and see what this can look like. And that's been absolutely fantastic. And their team is now running Hawk AI.
That's fantastic. I'm glad you said that they're better than you, because one of the things I always tell people, like when newbie buyers come in, or newbie sellers rather, usually they're the ones telling me this. They'll be like, "Well, why would a buyer ever buy me when they can just go build it themselves like I did?" It's like, "Oh, you don't understand. The buyer is buying you because they get to skip like 2, 3, 5 years. Like you already did like a lot of the
Exactly.
hard work, right? That's what they're buying."
Exactly. There's certain service offerings. Yeah, there's certain service offerings where that's really prevalent too. I mean, we're looking at like SEO, for instance. Of course, we offer SEO. We have a developed SEO service offering within our house, but that's such a technicalized field. It's something you can't really fake either. To be able to sell that to a client on a longer term strategy in a way that's going to be effective and hit the goals and the ROI that they want. Not only do you need a team that can execute on that, you need a team that can convey the message. Hey, this is the expectation you need to have around that. So as we're bringing in, again, I say it's less about just buying books of business or buying revenue. It's more like, no, we're buying people. I hate to say buying people in that sense, but just really kind of buying into people, investing within people that we think can be sort of that face for that service offering within us, within our organization as well.
Yeah, SEO is kind of a special fish in that, like, so my background in marketing is SEO, and I built EF mostly on the back of SEO. Sold a lot of SEO businesses, and a lot of SEOs are not good at conveying what they mean when they're talking about like the backlinks, the referring domains, the topical authority. The client is just like, "What is this guy talking about?" So you need a special guy to be
Mm-hmm.
able to convey that. I agree with that. When it comes to your deal flow, I mean, it sounds like you guys have a pretty healthy deal flow. You said you've acquired 11 agencies at this point. Is that the number?
Oh, we've done 12 today. I have two signed up right now and are in conversations with a handful of others as well.
Gotcha. And how are you sourcing the acquisitions? Is there like a certain type of pipeline or a channel that you guys use? Are you using a mixture of things? Tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, I'd say 95% of it's proprietary deal flow. We source it in house using a number of different sort of software outlets and resources, keeping up with newsletters, keeping up with market reports and things like that, but really just developing a thesis and finding agencies in different geographic areas or in different service offerings or what we think to be at a certain size. One of my associates, and frankly, my right hand guy, Scott, he's something of a wizard when it comes to sourcing and just understanding the landscape that is the market that we're kind of currently playing in. So he and I work really heavily together on like, hey, what does the strategy look like? Where can we find these agencies, and how can we continue to scale it out? But yeah, it's been all pretty much proprietary, and a large part of that was actually what we were doing at the last role, the M&A advisory group in Los Angeles that I mentioned. And one of the reasons that this strategies work so well within Hawke is we had a background in really kind of finding a lot of these acquisitions prior to engaging with them and facilitating transactions.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm assuming a mix of cold email, LinkedIn, conferences, stuff like that is all goes into kind of the machine of the proprietary deal flow you built.
Yeah, a bit. A lot of it's too. We've developed a really strong. One of the cool things about having the number of deals we've done is kind of like some deals breed more deals, and it kind of compounds from there. And the idea there is like we have proof of concept. So we have some pretty killer case studies. I mean, most agencies we've acquired, even in the first year or so, get close to doubling in their revenue out the gate. I'd say 6 or 7 of the founders that we've acquired are still with us and are happy to chat with new prospective founders that might want to join up with us and do the same. So it's kind of developed into this real engine and sort of like an empire that's building out where people can not only just be like, okay, well, this all seems theoretical. It's like, no, no, we've done this before. We know how to do this. We have it down to almost a recipe in a sense. And we have people on board that can attest to that as well.
Josh, I'm glad you said Empire because by the end of this, we'll convince you and Eric to sell all of Hawk on Empire Flippers to complete the entire name here. Don't worry, I'll high pressure sell you into it by the end, my man.
I'm sure.
That's awesome. I skipped over a little bit of the criteria when we were talking about the agencies. What is the size you're looking for? Are you looking for like 10 men crew or certain kind of revenue numbers? What is that criteria?
Yeah, it does vary. So again, being privately held means we can just sort of call shots and be flexible with our acquisition structures. I'd say our sweet spot traditionally is about the 1 to 1.5 million to probably 5 or 6 million or so of net revenue. And we say net revenue after any ad spend or pass through expenses, but that's sort of how we're looking at things. But that being said, we have looked at agencies that are doing 4, 5, 600,000 dollars in net revenue, which is a strong team that was really attractive and that we thought we could bring over and develop. And we've been able to do deals like that and scale them into much larger organizations. And we were talking to some right now. They're in the $7, $8 million range. I mean, we got to pre-LOI stages with a $11 million agency as well. So it really comes down to, and I think in my 4 years here, I've learned it really comes down to the philosophy and sort of the ambition behind the people that we're going to be bringing on. So if that lines up, it's less about the metrics, as long as the numbers aren't completely skewed, but less about the metrics and more along the lines of good people that want to do good work with another large, strong organization. If we can find synergies in the way we're thinking about that, we can generally find a way to make a deal work.
That makes sense. I like the loose criteria. It leaves you open more toward more opportunity, right? The serendipity of it all. When it comes to you reaching out to these sellers, is it like how do you approach a seller to get them to say, "Okay, I'm interested. Tell me more, Josh." Like, what's your approach there?
Yeah, so I think largely we just get on kind of the first thing is just basically getting on the phone as much as we possibly can, but really just we had a deck put together that kind of outlines what we're doing. Most founders, when they read through it or kind of get an email from any of us, they understand what the conversation is about.
Hmm.
There are a lot of acquirers in the marketing space at the moment. The agency landscape is, I don't want to say inundated, but it's frothy, we'll call it, with a lot of people trying to buy right now. One of the benefits we have too is that we ourselves are very loud in the marketplace. One of the testaments to Hawk's success is we've marketed ourselves extremely well and just broadly in the marketplace on a global scale. A big testament to that is Eric, our founder, being out and about and God knows where at any given time, but meeting the right people and doing just sort of all these events and just being out there and really marketing it. So most people kind of know who we are, especially in the size range that we're looking for. From there, it's really just kind of explaining what we've been up to, why it's been successful, kind of what we're looking for, and then I kind of really just try to dive into, as I keep saying, what are you looking for? I mean, we're chatting here. You know, we're after what would make this attractive for you. How can we set this up that would be good for you? Are there any hurdles that you found in the day-to-day running organization? Have you been struggling to get lead generation or deal flow kind of coming in? Sometimes we run into marketers that are just great marketers. They just hate running an organization. That's sort of the nuance of running a business is holding them back and frankly irritating them to the point of not being able to generate as much business as they would like. So it's really just about finding what they're looking for, the reason they took the call in the first place. And then again, we can kind of tailor deals around that and see what we can make happen.
There are more marketers out there who hate the business side of it than people think. I have a buddy, we were in this mastermind in Chiang Mai, and he's doing really well to like 100K profit per month with his backlinking agency, selling backlinks to other SEOs, right? But he was in my mastermind group and we started talking about the organization part of his business, and it turns out like there was none. Like this guy's like
Yeah.
losing his entire life trying to do like basic admin stuff when he needs to be out there being the like hectic marketer, So that is quite common, I find. It's the whole E Myth revisited problem, right? Where the baker finds out like
Yeah,
if you run a bakery, you're not baking.
yeah, exactly.
So you
But
get oh yeah,
okay.
go ahead.
Oh no, I was gonna say that definitely kind of lines up with what we see too. Is making sure people are in the right position to do what it is they do best and what they want to do. I find that holds back a lot of people over time.
Yeah, and then there's the whole thing of like, maybe they grow to a certain size, but there's always those peaks and valleys, right? Like the business grows to a certain level and then it's stagnating. And so you have to retool the whole thing. It's almost like you're starting a new business. And the entrepreneur's like, God, I don't want to start over. I mean, that's the reason why a lot of them come to
Yep.
us to sell. They're like, give this to someone else. There's a lot of opportunity here, but I just don't have the willpower to do it.
Yeah, I run into that all the time, especially in agencies, because a lot of times we'll find them that they'll be on a strong growth trajectory, 20, 30, 40% a year, but then they sort of plateau around a certain mark, traditionally in that $3 to $5 million mark. And a lot of times they don't really know why. And we can kind of come in and kind of pinpoint the areas and the issues that we've been having, or they've been having, and telling them what we can do to kind of alleviate that concern. So just getting them over a plateau is a big part too, because a lot of times they have a lot of gas left in the tank and they want to do the work. They just need a little bit of, so I guess, just juice or gas behind the fire and a little bit of consolidation to make it happen.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of guidance from someone who's actually walked the road is extremely valuable, right? So I could definitely see that. Okay, so you get a seller interested, you get an agency owner interested, you're on the call, you start the due diligence process. What does that look like for you guys? What are you looking for in terms of key metrics, team members, the whole nine yards?
Yeah, definitely. So the first things we're going to obviously look at are like size, growth, profitability of the organization, understanding how their payroll kind of falls in against what our current team structure looks like. And again, we're a large enough organization. We're just shy of about 200 people internally, so we can make most things work out as long as it pencils more or less. One of the biggest things we really look for and we're stringent on, and I tell all the owners we're speaking with around this, is one of the reasons we've been successful operationally is we have a very stringent metric around cost of service of our clients. So making sure that they fall within a somewhat reasonable range around what our cost of service currently is against the cost to service a client against what they're kind of bringing in. That's something that's tricky for us to bring in if it's way skewed. So if our cost of service is 1.5, 2.5 times more than ours is, that's almost a deal killer for us. Not necessarily, but it can become sort of really kind of a hurdle for us. If that checks out, then it really comes down to like, okay, you might not be as profitable as you think you should be. Why is that? Or you're extremely profitable. Why is that? Is that going to be sustainable? Or are you guys going to be able to sustain that level of profitability and revenue with the headcount that's low? I know you guys like running lean, but is it realistic to kind of continue this? And then just kind of have those conversations. Me and my team will kind of dig around under the hood and do a fair amount of quality of earnings, making sure everything kind of checks out, making sure the client contracts are sound. In the meantime, the founders, operators, or execs, whoever they like to bring on board, will traditionally be meeting with our executive team and really discussing the strategy and the philosophy around like, hey, this is what it could look like, this is what we're going to need, this is how we do business. And then we kind of come together at the end of the day, make sure it all lines up, and then hit the ground running.
That makes sense. The cost of service thing, that's interesting. So, from my perspective, I would love to have your insight on this. I'm sure my audience would be interested too. From my perspective, like an agency that is like high six figures, low seven figures in terms of its like actual valuation based on like SDE or
Yeah.
EBITDA, they tend to have like pretty good margins, like between 50 to 60%. But usually it's like a small man show, like, one man and maybe
Yeah.
two or three other people. But then as you grow, those margins go way, way down often where like I've read that in the eight figure realm, often 15 to 20% margins are considered like this is really, really good. From your perspective, like what are your thoughts on what kind of margin an agency should be at the different valuation levels?
Yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there. The smaller agencies we're chatting with, so again, those sub $1 million ones traditionally, I don't want to say traditionally, often are falling into that, yeah, kind of 30 to 50, 55% even a margin range. But yeah, again, a lot of time it's like a three-man shop and the owner is running most of his expenses through the business. So the ad backs are pretty
Yeah.
substantial. And then that's kind of what it looks like, which is fine. We see that every day and it's very normal. As you start to look up market as well, yeah, I'd say 15% is probably where we start to see agencies kind of fall in at. We've seen some larger agencies come in at closer to 20%. I'd say in a perfect world, we'd like to see around 20%, at 20% EBITDA margins if an agency is falling into that $5, $6 million range, which does often happen. it's the sustainability around that and the way that they do their business. Because a lot of time that'll be very project driven with sort of large retainers kind of coming in on one project basis. What does that look like in 12 months for us? What does that look like in 18 months for us? How can we continue to bring in deal flow with that size and that scale to make sure it stays at that level? And so we just got to mitigate that and understand it. But the way that we structure out deals ultimately is that, look, we don't make a dime until you guys make a dime. We want to grow together and really put some gas behind you guys to be as successful as you possibly can. So that's traditionally how I would look at it. But I'd say, yeah, you're pretty much in line with what we've seen on a valuation standpoint, not even a valuation standpoint, but a profitability standpoint as it scales up.
Cool. That's good. It's good to know. I'm not totally out to lunch on that. That was my own personal observations of the niche or the industry, rather. When it comes to these margins, do you see businesses are like, let's say it's a business is profitable, it's 10% margin, so but it's underneath
Mhm.
that 15% that you're talking about. Now that you've acquired so many, is there like quick levers that you see for agency growth that you can do and get that 10% up to that 15%? And if so, what kind of levers like that exist in the agency world?
Yeah, so we definitely deal with it more internally than externally. So when we bring over founders or operators, teams, agencies, we don't put them in a position to have to worry about profitability management. That's what we handle. The idea there is that we want them to focus on the growth of the net revenue of the organization. The levers that we read out the gate kind of tap into a lot of redundancies from the expense line items are big because again we're such a large enough organization that there's going to be redundancy from a software standpoint, back office stuff, HR, legal, accounting, things like that. We can right out the gate do. I'd say one of the ways we really also help with that is understanding where these, and this is a revenue driver, but also a profitability driver, understanding where they play best. So if they're best at tackling large upmarket projects with sort of larger ticket service constraints, then we put them in a position to get those leads and to really kind of tap into that because they're going to pay out better over a period of time. A lot of times, some groups are better sort of a fire sale, smaller retainer window kind of client base. We put them in that spot. But I'd say the ultimate levers that really kind of come in are making sure that team's optimized, making sure that headcount is equivocal to the level of service that they think they should be operating with. Because we run into some teams that are like, hey, look, we have too much business kind of coming in. We can't service it all. So it's like, okay, we need to make some hires around that. It's really just about looking at what the people are doing, what they should be doing, and how we can make it as efficient as possible.
That makes sense. A lot of my agency friends, they do get to that part or that point. Usually it's around the I want to say 20 to 40 client range is when it happens where like the
Mm-hmm.
wheels start falling off like, oh God, what do I do? How do I keep up with
Yeah.
all these people? I imagine with you guys being a bigger organization though, you might be able to absorb some of that. Like if you're buying another Google ad agency in the local market, for
Mm-hmm.
instance, like you probably have enough infrastructure to kind of absorb that and keep the quality high.
Yeah, definitely. If it's something that we're already doing at sort of a high scale or that we're very familiar with, then that's easy. That's almost like a plug and play scenario. We bring them in. Well, it might adjust pricing a little bit to get to our mark if it's below or just it's a little bit different. And then it's pretty straightforward. And then we're just funneling leads to the people that have been selling into that in their organization. And just, again, I keep saying it, but sky really is the limit there. We work on a much higher volume basis. So we are working with between 400 and 500 clients at any given time, and we're generating between 400 and 600 qualified leads a month. So it's a very different ball game than most. And the way it's been able to be successful is that our business development engine and our external marketing engine, or excuse me, internal marketing engine, is frankly second to none. We have just shy of a 30-person dedicated BD team. We're working with all those leads and just constantly marketing ourselves and the way that we do business to the world through different channels, be it podcasts like this, LinkedIn, news outlets, Eric on TV, things like that, and just continuing to be as loud in the marketplace as we possibly can be.
Yeah, that is definitely one of the things that attracted me to you initially to reach out to Eric over. I think I reached out to him over LinkedIn, or maybe I sent him a cold email after I read the book. But yeah, I like that you guys are actually marketing yourself. I feel most marketing agencies really struggle with that. And it's kind of like not eating your own dog food, right? Like that, what does the client think? When I was 18, I actually ran this Facebook ad. I didn't really know what I was doing, but I ran this Facebook ad to my local market in Alaska. And I bring them in to this simple funnel where it was just me on a video. And this is like back in 2008. So video is like pretty
Mhm.
rare. So it was very unique for the time. And I said, why should you hire this 18-year-old as your marketer? I told
Mhm.
them because I didn't cold call you like everyone else. I actually used internet marketing to get you here. You clicked an ad and now you're watching me talk to you.
Yep.
which worked. Of course, I knew nothing about the business side, man. So like the agency was a train wreck once they actually signed on. Like, how do I handle accounting? They just graduated high
Yeah.
school, but yeah, I think that's cool. When it comes to your deal structuring, so you get the seller interested. What kind of deal structuring are you putting out? I'm assuming you're not paying all in cash, or are you doing a bit of a cash, or is it more like, look what this can be if you come onto the team? Like, how do you structure the deals?
Yeah, so this is where it gets really unique for us, and the way we're able to do a lot of these deals without having external funding is that we're finding deals ideally that we can set up a growth trajectory together that'll pay out almost like an uncapped or an out perspective that pays out actually in perpetuity based on a revenue share sort of agreement going forward. So the way that we kind of structure this, we find agencies, we figure out, hey, this is where your guys' profitability is. This is probably what you would get as a traditionalized market multiple if you went out into a sell side process or a traditional PE sort of buying ring or something like that. We're like, look, this is what you would get is we paid out over 3 years if you hit certain metric contingents, and then at the end of the 3 years, you'd probably tap out or we give you a job or something like that. We can do those deals. The ones that we really like doing, again, is to find a ways where we can lock in their existing profitability, bring over their entire team, bring over the executives at executive level salaries, executive titles, bring over their entire team with a benefits and salary standpoint, take all the nuance again of running an organization off their plate, so everything below that net revenue line on a P&L is something they don't have to worry about anymore. And then to really find a growth trajectory again on a split on revenue going forward, given our business development engine, our just process, and just our engine as a whole, to really kind of get them to scale up. And the way that we have this set up too is if the organization were to continue to scale and grow like most of our other acquired businesses have, again, two, three, four times over this next several years. If the agency owner wants to exit, they'll continue to be paid out in perpetuity as long as Hawke Media is servicing the revenue that was not only brought to the table, but was also built together. So we have a founder that left 3 or 4 years ago that's laying on a beach somewhere in Florida, I believe. So shout out to him if he's listening. That is still collecting checks from us on a monthly basis because we're still servicing quite a few of his clients on a revenue share basis. So it's really about a growth trajectory and figuring out what we can do to get them to the next level. We fortunately have a lot of case studies that back that up. We bought an agency back in November of 2019. It was an affiliate channel that we weren't really offering that much of a service. I believe we've 6x its revenue since then. We bought one last April that we've more than doubled. So when the vision's clear and the founder or the team agrees with sort of what we want to see and what we want to see out of it, and we're sort of aligned there, then it really does ramp up quickly and stay profitable, I should say.
Interesting. So let's say you had like, I don't know, $1 million a year in SD agency or EBITDA, whichever you prefer. You acquire them. Are you giving them some upfront capital from there, or is it more just the into perpetuity as the revenue grows? And like, what would be the percentage of that? Because obviously, like, you guys need to make money too off of it, right? So I imagine some of the cash flow that's coming in would belong to Hawk, but you also need to give the balancing act of paying that founder what they were used to, I assume. But yeah, walk me through a little bit
Yeah,
more on
so
that.
so we model it out so they'll never be making a dime less than they're currently making. Traditionally, it pencils out so even in the first 30 days they're making more than they already were, and then just through the cross selling and upselling opportunities that we have, that scales growth tremendously. So again, we work with so many clients, and we're traditionally working with groups that we don't share a lot of clients with, or acquiring groups we don't share a lot of clients with. But yeah, in the past, we will offer, we have considered deals where it'd be like a portion of cash or something like that at close, and then eventually scaling into sort of more traditionalized earnouts. We actually haven't done one of those deals yet because the other one that we've been working with that has been more on the back end growth trajectory over several years has been has frankly just penciled to be a lot more lucrative than where the market currently stands. One, market multiples in the marketing in the space aren't fantastic. So multiples in
Yes.
the digital space are a little rough right now.
Yeah.
And a lot of agencies exactly will see that and just be like, so you're going to give me 3.5 times on my EBITDA and then I'm going to tap out, even though I've been building this for 20 years. And I'm
Yeah.
like, I don't want to do that, but that's all you're probably going to get. Or we do option B, or what I like to say option A, is to focus on this and see what we can really kind of do to scale and grow together. And candidly, just by being a part of our organization and being sort of strapped to the Hawke Media growth train, if you will, it almost kind of forces groups to grow with us. Not in the sense of just being forced to kind of take on more work or anything like that. It's just the way that we operate is at such an efficiency that the groups that come over just naturally fall in and scale tremendously.
So you guys are doing basically a zero money down deal with a lot of these kind of offers, which I think is great. I think that model. So I have to fight newbie buyers that come to me all the time, like, "Hey, I heard I could buy a business for $1, right?" because a lot of the
Yeah.
gurus on YouTube or whatever will be promoting some big course about it. And like I'm friends with some of those gurus and like they're good people, they do good deals. But I think a lot of newbie buyers at least don't understand how those deals are really done. Like you need to have some kind of like
Yeah.
massive value add. Like this is not a beginner strategy. This is pretty advanced. Like if
No.
you're not
Yeah.
Hawke Media, like you probably shouldn't be offering that kind of deal to an agency, right? So
Yeah,
that's
and
cool.
the more we've done, the better it sells too, obviously, because we have proof in the
Right.
pudding and founders that have been a part of it too. So yeah, it was a tough strategy when I joined it 4 years ago to
Oh, I
kind of
bet.
even wrap my head around initially, just because I was coming out of the traditionalized private equity world, doing like industrial deals for several billion-dollar funds across the board. Coming into this, looking a little bit down market, but understanding it's a largest trajectory. But once we scaled that out, it really did work, and it has been continuing to work. And candidly, the way that these are penciling in the first 12 to 18 months, they're going to make more than they would have in their entire earnout through a traditionalized deal, even if they were to get some cash at close. So being able to kind of show that on paper and show some case studies around the reality of that has been extremely helpful. But it just really is kind of market contingent and then understanding the motivation behind the sale in the first place.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I personally love those kind of zero money down deals. Like, but again, I just like for the audience out there listening, they always forget the back end part of like you need something to be able to make the deal logical, right?
Yeah.
If you used a broker, like let's say you came to us, because every now and then we get agencies, right? How would you go
Mhm.
about using a sell side broker with this kind of zero money down deal? Would it be like, okay, here's a, I don't know, a $2 million agency, we'll pay the broker commission, and then like the rest would be like just like in your normal deal structure? Is that kind of how you'd play it?
Yeah, if we were engaging with, we do have like a buy side finder's fee agreement for brokers
Gotcha.
or broker dealers, bankers, things like that. Traditionally, since we're not valuing agencies on enterprise value based on EBITDA on a multiple basis or anything like that, we'll do like a percentage of revenue or something like that. It generally equates to about the value of that. And then we'll pay that out and then just do our traditionalized deal structure. We haven't been fielding too many sell side opportunities lately. I mean, I get approached by dozens of bankers a week or a day, even sometimes, just because that's where the market's at.
I'm about to
But
blow
our
up your
proprietary
inbox
deal,
even more with the other ones listening to this. I got to reach
yeah,
out to Josh
I
right
believe it.
now.
Yeah, we will look at it, but kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, our proprietary deal flow engine is so devout, and we're having such great conversations with a lot of people in the space that we haven't been able or haven't needed to kind of tap into that network too much. Not to say we won't, not to say we aren't still looking at a few, but traditionally the proprietary deal flow side has been more advantageous, and obviously it lines up more with the structure that we're working with too. Because we're running into founders, they're like, "Hey, no, this is where I'm at. This is what I need." And sometimes it's just they just need sort of a little bit of help to get back where either where they were, or where they think they should be, and we can provide that.
No, I think that totally makes sense. For my prolific buyers, I always tell them like, so usually the process of how it happens on our end is a seller will come, say they sell, I don't know, $3, $5 million business with us. So now they have like the most liquidity they've ever had. And those sellers often end up becoming our buyers. So they'll end up buying multiple businesses from us. But I always tell them, like, look, at the end of the day, a broker is basically a marketing channel. Like, I love for you to buy more from me, of course, but as your friend coaching you, you should mix it up. And yeah, private deal flow, your own proprietary system, if you're planning on really going the gamut, it's always something I would recommend, and using brokers as kind of just part of the mix. So I think that's
Yeah.
smart.
Yeah, it's been good. Obviously, you have a very devout sort of Rolodex of bankers and broker dealers in the space that we can kind of talk to. Or sometimes, if we're getting really specific with something we're looking for, I might reach out to some sort of someone that has relationships like that in the space too. But yeah, no, it's been great, and we've been having a lot of killer conversations with some founders all over the country and frankly all over the world.
Yeah, I bet. After you acquire and you integrate these agencies, how do you measure the success of the acquisition? Is there something you're looking for on like a timeline? Like we want to hit this milestone? And also, have you acquired agencies where that didn't happen, where the success wasn't there at the end of the road?
Yeah, I'd say the way we like to measure it the best is, I mean, client retention is a big one. We haven't had too much of an issue there, but obviously we're bringing over a book of business. We want to see them stick around or for people to stick around. I'd say traditionally it's we have kind of very lofty and ambitious growth goals that we would even label as conservative to a point, but a lot of people would look at it and be like, how on earth you could hit this with the acquisition targets that we're bringing over? So just seeing kind of where they fall on a revenue standpoint in the first, I'd say 12 to 18 months is a good testament of it. Most of the time, it's 2x or more, sometimes even 3x. So that's fantastic. Anything short of that, we consider like, okay, what could we have done better here? And for a lot of people, that seems really lofty, but realistically, it's just kind of where we're falling organically as an agency. We're just scaling at such a pace that we have high expectations and hopes for the groups that we're bringing over. So That's probably one way we really like to look at it. And then also, it's interesting to watch sort of where the founder falls into the organization. 'Cause a lot of times they might come over with the intent of like, oh no, I'm just going to drive business and just kind of focus on BD efforts. And next thing you know, they're sort of like a thought leader executive within the organization, sitting at the table and really driving our strategy forward too, which is always exciting. And those some of the more attractive sort of candidates that we brought over to the table that have fallen into roles like that. Also, as far as failures, not too many. Fortunately, we've actually done really well. The only time we ever really have had much of an issue is when sort of, again, I keep saying it, but when the philosophy doesn't really align. We had one guy we acquired, shoot, it must have been 4 years ago now, that the intent was for him to stay on for years, 3, 4, 5 years, and really scale out and grow with us into the exit on that perpetual strategy. 6 months in, he took a CMO job with a client of ours. Totally fine. We could have penciled out the deal to be a lot more attractive for him had we known that out the gate. No bad blood there. Obviously, still all good. We still work with him on a case by case basis. It's just really like, hey, what do you want to do? And that's why I asked that in the first conversations is like, look, let's make sure we understand what both of our expectations are, where your head's at for the next 2, 3, 5, 10 years. And no, not everyone has to have a perfect answer for that, but at least understanding what you'd like to get out of a transaction is frankly paramount to the success going forward.
Yeah, I'd say that answer is more important than the money that the entrepreneur gets. Like, we just sold a $13 million e-commerce store, I think 2 months ago, and I don't know if this seller had it, but I've seen it with other sellers where we like hand them all this money, this life changing money, right? Millions of dollars, and then like they're happy for 5 minutes, and then they're like, "Well, what do I do now?" And they become this listless, like
Exactly.
postpartum depression entrepreneur, right? Like, where do I go? What do I do? That was like my life. So I always ask that question when I talk to sellers, like, what is your goal here? Not just like the money thing, like put that aside. That's like, let's put that in the business goals section, but what are your like personal goals? Like, what do you want to do? Right. So I think that's an
Exactly.
extremely important conversation.
Yeah, entirely. And when you get people into that sort of, when you find people that are honest about that and you really get them into doing what it is they want to do, the money falls behind it too. It just starts to come in because if they're in a position to do what they do best, what it is they want to do, then there's no scenario realistically where that's going to fail because we're going to set them up to be able to kind of do that also. And then the money will come in. But I totally understand what you mean. So the postpartum founder position, you
Yeah.
run into founders that like, oh yeah, I sold my business 2 years ago for $400 million. I'm like, oh, what was that like? Like, oh, it's the worst day of my life. Not having anything to do. Like,
Yeah, it's so counterintuitive, right? I always joke that
exactly.
humanity is a creature of tomorrow. If tomorrow ever becomes today, we get really, really sad because like you need to have the next goal before you finish the previous big goal, right? Like you need to have that all planned
Yeah.
out. So I like the way you approach it. I agree with that kind of philosophy. Before we get into the rapid fire questions here on this podcast, just you've acquired around 12 agencies. Sounds like you're going to keep on going down this path, which I think is really cool. I think it's a cool opportunity for any agency owners listening in my audience. Use me, of course, and I'll reach out to Josh. I'll spam his inbox. But how do you like? What kind of lessons have you learned after all these deal flow you've inspected, the acquisitions you've done? Like, how has that all influenced your approach today versus say 4 years ago when you first started this?
Ooh, that's a great question.
Deep. It's a deep cut.
Yeah, definitely. I think 4 years ago, coming out of a more traditionalized, again, PE deal flow kind of position, it was much more metric back then, even the margins against revenue, against profitability, against growth, where now it's a lot more. It's you really do need to understand what a person's ambitions are and kind of what they're looking for. And it sounds a little touchy feely around it, but the difference really comes down to because you might have a founder that says one thing, and then 90 days later, as you're about to close up a deal, their ambition around it changes entirely, which is going to change the trajectory of the entire deal. Initially, I think that would get frustrating. Now I understand that's just life. That's just what people's ambitions and goals change as they discuss things and as they evaluate next steps. A lot of the founders we talked to had never thought about selling the organization. And next thing they know, they're under term sheet going through a diligence process, and they're like, "Whoa, wait a minute, what could this look like?" So understanding that
Yeah.
people are kind of dynamic, you have to be a little bit flexible around it. Through that, I think it's just important to keep expectations very realistic, but also stringent, and making sure that the communication is as straightforward as possible. Sticking to certain timelines, sticking to what we spoke about, and then just making sure that we're all on the same page going into it. And that's candidly through a trial and error period where I've learned the most, probably.
Yeah. We would have thought erratic and neurotic founders might become erratic and neurotic.
Yeah, to say the least.
Founders are, I find, pretty similar to marketers in the sense that we're like creative cats, like trying to herd them, like all this ADHD, all this potential just shooting everywhere, all the shiny object syndrome. So yeah,
Yep.
I can really do that with my own experiences. Well, cool, man. We're towards the end of the podcast here. So I would like to get into the rapid fire section where basically I just ask you three questions and you give me three quick answers. Are you ready?
Sounds good. So,
See, look how easy that was. That was the first one. Cool. What are the best hidden growth opportunities in your view after all of your experience when it comes to the agency and the M&A world right now?
in the agency world, the hidden growth opportunities are founders that are being underutilized or frankly underselling themselves. That might be, again, extremely good at what they do in a specialized field that haven't been able to tap into it because they just have never thought about doing it on a larger scale. Obviously, trickier to find, but when you find a founder that is specialized, might only be a 2 or 3 man shop, but they're just frankly the best in the business at what they do. That's an M&A opportunity that you may want to invest a little bit more into than you traditionally want on your usual model because the ROI will be substantial.
Yeah, I love it. What tools or resources can people use to help themselves find and assess potential acquisitions? Like, what do you guys use?
Yeah, so different. I think not even so much a generalized resource. I think the key to that, and hopefully this answers the question, is to have a very devout thesis and understand what you're really looking for, so you can narrow in. There's a lot of agencies out there. There's a lot of agencies for sale out there. To try to evaluate them all and expect them all to look the same is just extremely unrealistic and not going to fulfill any sort of investment criteria that you're kind of looking at. So I think understanding where you want to be, why you want to be there, what you're going to do once you get into that space is absolutely key. And then just using any sort of deal sourcing software and platforms. We have our own, which I will not say what we're using because it's proprietary. That kind of evaluates in those areas, but just understanding really what you want to see and having the profile and sticking to it. It's easy to get a little bit off base, but sticking to kind of what you want, what you're looking for, and then you'll find yourself in a much better position if you actually start to get a term sheet, LOIs, things like that.
That has spoken like a man who's acquired a lot of businesses. I always tell buyers criteria is the most important thing. Like, you need to find a way to say no to the businesses for sale quicker than saying yes. Like you got to
Yep.
filter them all out because there's so many for sale that are not a good fit for you for like what you actually want to do,
Yep.
right? So that's a great
Exactly.
answer. All right, hardest question, my friend. Since you've started working in this wild world of acquiring agencies, what has been your funniest moment?
Ooh, that is a tough question.
This is a soul searching
Funniest
question.
moment. I don't know if it's necessarily the funniest moment, but one thing that happened to us not too long ago that we still actually don't have an answer around is we were chatting with the founder of an organization, kind of getting to close here shortly, and then we found out that basically the founder got cold feet, didn't want to do the deal. Totally fine, that happens from time to time, not a big deal. We were then approached about 6 months later by the same organization with an entirely different set of people and teams that were looking to do a transaction with an entirely different set of clients. So very unusual kind of way that that transpired, where it came about. Like we still don't entirely know who had the authority to sign off on these deals. We didn't get that deep into diligence, or I think we would have found it a little bit more. But it was just kind of the initial phases. So it was almost like this company was kind of being catfished from internally or something like that. We still don't really know what had happened or where the people went. We elected, obviously, even on the second round, not to pursue with it because it was just getting a little sketchy. And
Yeah,
back, but we
damn.
still kind of joke about it. We kind of look back and we're like, huh, we still have no idea what those people do or where they came from, but I wish
Oh
them the
man,
best.
that is a terrifying thing for anyone out there in the audience listening. Or if you're, not using a broker or whatever, which private deal flow is fine, but you got to be careful on that stuff. I've heard stories like that. I haven't heard a story like that specifically, but I've heard of sellers doing some pretty nefarious stuff to buyers doing off-market deals before. Yeah, that's wild, man.
Yeah, it was interesting. And no knock to them. Everyone was very polite. And the second group of people that kind of came about, I mean, seemed genuine and stuff like that. We weren't going to press on it and kind of understand what happened, but just not really understanding it. It was just, it got a
That's
little
strange.
strange. We're like, yeah, we can't do this right now.
I had a seller. This has happened years ago. She sold a small affiliate site with us. I think it was like, I want to say it was like 110 or $120,000, something like that. It was a side hustle type of thing, but not for her in Nigeria. It
Mhm.
was like a pretty serious amount of money, right? So we get the bank wire and we transfer the business over to the buyer, and then we're trying to send her money, minus our commission fee, right? And the bank is like, no, you can't send this to her. Like, why? Like, she's in Nigeria. Like, I know she's our customer. Like, oh, are you related to a prince? Is that what she told you? Like, no, she's like a legitimate customer of ours. And so they
That's
thought that we
funny.
were getting scammed by this lady that we just sold her like $120,000 business. Like, no, we like legitimately owe her money. And so we had to like go through all these crazy hoops just to send her money. Like, oh my gosh. So that is like the opposite end of like the scammer, like the bad reputation type of thing.
That's pretty funny. And meanwhile, she's probably out there thinking like, "Oh my god, I just got scammed as well."
Yeah,
So
like what is, are they the Yahoo? I
wait a
thought that those were only in
minute.
Lagos. What's going on?
Yeah,
No, she was super cool with it. I think she's
that's great.
experienced that before, like as a freelancer, right? Where she's getting paid through some kind of like wise transfer or whatever. But it's just a very like funny and kind of shitty experience for her. That was unfortunate that we had to deal with.
Yeah, no, that's funny. It's not something you hear every day, but I completely understand.
Yeah. Well, cool, man. I really enjoyed this conversation. I think buying agencies, like I said, is a bit of an unsung hero. Like I think agencies are such a interesting and cool business model when you do it right. So I'm really glad like we got to do this podcast finally. I know we had to push it back a little bit,
Yeah,
which was my fault, but I really enjoyed
no
this, man.
problem.
If someone wanted to pick your brain specifically, where should they go to connect with you?
Yeah, definitely. No, I'm a fairly open book, and I'm happy to chat with people kind of on a exploratory, on a regular basis. My email is probably the best way to do it. It's just jspringer@hawkemedia.com. Happy to kind of chat with whomever. Connect with me on LinkedIn if you guys would like. Just Josh Springer. And yeah, no, always happy to chat and see where things are. But yeah, hopefully we can continue the strategy for a while. It's been a wild ride. I think we have a lot of fun stuff coming up.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, no, appreciate the time today.
There you have it. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it got you inspired at all the different things that are happening in this industry. And of course, if you just want to buy a highly profitable business, you can always go to empireflippers.com/marketplace, or maybe you want to make an exit of your highly profitable business, and you could go to empireflippers.com/sell your site. I've been your host, Greg. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you leave a review, give us a like, a follow, share it across social media. Talk to you all soon. See you on the next episode.